This is GhanaNewspapers Newsroom. Live coverage. Real-time updates. Preserving Ghana's story. Empowering its digital future.
Hello viewers, I am Sandra. Welcome to the GhanaNewspapers Newsroom. Today in the studio, we examine an important cultural and historical topic titled, How Valentine's Day Evolved in Ghana, from the Gold Coast era to today. We explore how a Western observance gradually transformed into a uniquely Ghanaian tradition, known widely today as Chocolate Day. In pre-colonial Ghanaian societies, including Akan, Iwe, Ga, Dagomba, and others, there was no indigenous festival equivalent to Valentine's Day. Love, courtship, and marriage were governed by traditional rites, family negotiations, and customary law rather than a single calendar date. During the Gold Coast colonial period, Christian missionary schools introduced Western calendars, literacy, and foreign observances. By the early to mid-20th century, Valentine's Day was known in select Christian schools in Accra and other colonial towns. However, it remained largely school-based and religious, not a public or national celebration. From the 1970s through the 1980s, Valentine's Day gained quiet popularity among secondary school and university students. Card exchanges, chocolates, and small gifts became common on February 14th, particularly within Western-style educational institutions. In the early 1990s, national newspapers barely mentioned the occasion. However, the liberalization of Ghana's media landscape changed everything. Private radio stations such as Radio Gold, Joy FM, and Peace FM began promoting Valentine's Day with love messages, competitions, and themed programs. Researchers note that Ghanaians did not merely imitate Western culture. They adapted Valentine's Day to local urban youth culture, reshaping its meaning. By the early 2000s, Valentine's Day became highly visible on campuses and in urban centers, though rural participation was still limited. A defining moment came in 2005, when the Ghana Tourism Authority, in collaboration with Cocobod and the Cocoa Processing Company, launched National Chocolate Day. The goal was simple yet strategic: promote local chocolate consumption and connect love with Ghana's cocoa heritage. By 2007 and 2008, February 14th in Ghana had become widely known as Chocolate Day, giving the celebration a distinctly national identity. In the digital age, Valentine's Day interest now peaks online from late January to mid-February. Young adults between the ages of 25 and 34 dominate Valentine-related searches, purchases, and social media engagement. Retailers, e-commerce platforms, and content creators intensify promotions annually, reflecting Ghana's dual cultural framing. Today, Valentine's Day, or Chocolate Day, is firmly embedded in Ghana's social and commercial life. Celebrations include gift exchanges, romantic dinners, hotel events, church programs, and vibrant social media campaigns. Economically, the season boosts floristry, hospitality, fashion, chocolate production, and local entrepreneurship. In summary, Valentine's Day in Ghana evolved from a colonial school observance into a nationwide, localized celebration tied to cocoa, commerce, and digital life. Valentine's Day in Ghana is not merely a Western import. It reflects how global practices are reshaped by local institutions and Ghanaian values.
The end of the transatlantic slave trade in the 19th century is often presented in historical narratives as a clear moral victory led by European abolitionists. However, in reality, the process was complex, uneven, and frequently misrepresented, particularly in early newspapers and colonial reports. In the region now known as Ghana, selective reporting played a crucial role in shaping public understanding of abolition, often emphasizing imperial benevolence while minimizing African agency, economic disruptions, and the persistence of coercive labor systems. Britain's passage of the Slave Trade Act of 1807 marked a legal turning point, making it illegal for British ships to participate in the slave trade. This was followed by aggressive naval patrols along the West African coast aimed at suppressing illegal trafficking. Later, the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 formally abolished slavery within the British Empire. However, newspapers both in Britain and the Gold Coast tended to present these legislative acts as immediate and comprehensive successes, In reality, illegal slave trading continued for decades. Portuguese, Spanish, Brazilian, and American traders remained active, and clandestine operations persisted well into the 1860s. Early reporting rarely acknowledged this gap between policy and enforcement. Instead, newspapers often portrayed abolition as swift and definitive, reinforcing the narrative of British moral leadership led by figures such as William Wilberforce. By the mid-19th century, missionary presses and colonial newspapers had begun circulating in the Gold Coast. Publications often framed abolition within the broader ideology of the civilizing mission. Articles emphasized that British rule had liberated Africans from barbaric practices, presenting colonial expansion as a humanitarian intervention. This selective framing ignored several critical realities. European demand had been the primary driver of the slave trade. African societies had complex systems of servitude that differed from plantation slavery. The transition to colonial rule often replaced slave labor with forced labor and exploitative taxation systems. By omitting these complexities, newspapers reinforced imperial legitimacy and justified expanding colonial administration. Another major aspect of selective reporting was the marginalization of African resistance movements. Throughout the 19th century, many African rulers and communities actively resisted both slave trading and colonial control. Some coastal leaders negotiated trade reforms, while inland states restructured economies away from slave exports. Newspapers of the period rarely highlighted these indigenous initiatives. Instead, abolition was depicted primarily as a European achievement. This omission erased the roles of African diplomats, merchants, and reformers who facilitated economic transitions toward legitimate commerce such as palm oil, rubber, and cocoa. The end of the slave trade caused significant economic disruptions across the Gold Coast. Many states that had depended on slave trading revenue experienced political instability and shifting power dynamics. For example, warfare patterns changed and commercial elites had to adapt to new forms of trade. Yet newspapers often downplayed these economic challenges. Instead, they focused on success stories of emerging industries, especially agricultural exports. By the late 19th century, reports celebrated cocoa cultivation led by pioneers like Tete Kwashi as proof of successful post-slavery economic transformation. While cocoa indeed became a cornerstone of Ghana's economy, such reporting overlooked the difficult transition period and the labor exploitation that accompanied plantation expansion. Perhaps the most significant omission in abolition-era reporting was the persistence of forced labor under colonial rule. Systems such as indentured labor, compulsory public works, and taxation policies compelled Africans to work under conditions that closely resembled earlier forms of coercion. Colonial newspapers seldom described these practices as exploitation. Instead, they framed them as necessary for modernization and infrastructure development. This selective language shaped public perception, masking the continuity between slavery and colonial labor regimes. The selective reporting of abolition profoundly influenced historical memory in Ghana and beyond. For decades, textbooks and popular narratives echoed colonial-era framing, emphasizing European humanitarianism while minimizing African complexity. Only in the 20th century, particularly during nationalist movements, did Ghanaian scholars and journalists begin critically reassessing these narratives. They highlighted African participation in both the slave trade and its abolition, as well as the structural inequalities that persisted after legal emancipation. Selective reporting on the end of the slave trade illustrates how newspapers function not merely as sources of information, but as instruments of power and ideology. By emphasizing imperial morality, downplaying African agency, and ignoring ongoing exploitation, early press narratives shaped a simplified and often misleading historical record. Understanding these biases is essential for reconstructing a more accurate history of abolition, one that recognizes both the global forces involved and the complex roles played by African societies in the transformation from slavery to colonial modernity. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GH Newspapers on all our social media platforms. The history of slavery and abolition in the area now known as Ghana is deeply intertwined with global economic systems, imperial expansion, African political structures, and the emergence of print journalism as a powerful instrument of public opinion. From the 15th century through the 19th century, slavery evolved from localized systems of servitude into a vast transatlantic commercial enterprise. By the time abolitionist movements gained traction in the 19th century, newspapers had become critical tools that shaped how societies understood, justified, or condemned slavery. Before European arrival, forms of servitude already existed in many West African societies. Among the Akan, Ewe, Ga, and Dagomba communities, slavery was often domestic and integrated into kinship systems. Enslaved persons, frequently war captives, debtors, or criminals, could marry, own property, and sometimes assimilate into their captors' families. This system differed fundamentally from chattel slavery that later developed under European influence. However, these indigenous structures laid a social framework that European traders would later exploit. When Portuguese traders arrived along the Gold Coast in the late 15th century, they encountered existing networks of trade and political alliances that facilitated the expansion of slave exportation. From the 1500s onward, European powers, including the Portuguese, Dutch, British, and Danes, constructed coastal forts such as Elmina Castle (1482) and Cape Coast Castle. These forts became central nodes in a global trading system linking West Africa, Europe, and the Americas. By the 18th century, the Gold Coast had become one of the most significant slave exporting regions in Africa. Historians estimate that between 1.5 and 2 million enslaved Africans were transported from this region alone. African intermediaries, including powerful states like Asante, played roles in capturing and trading prisoners of war in exchange for firearms, textiles, and other goods. The abolition movement gained momentum in Europe during the late 18th century, driven by religious groups such as Quakers and evangelical reformers. In Britain, figures like William Wilberforce spearheaded campaigns that culminated in the Slave Trade Act of 1807, which outlawed British participation in the transatlantic slave trade. Later, the Slavery Abolition Act of 1833 formally ended slavery within the British Empire, including the Gold Coast. However, abolition did not immediately dismantle forced labor systems. The 19th century saw the introduction of print media in the Gold Coast largely through missionary and colonial initiatives. Early newspapers such as the Gold Coast Times, founded in 1874, and later publications like the Gold Coast Chronicle played crucial roles in shaping political discourse. These newspapers emerged during a period when abolitionist rhetoric was already dominant in European political culture. The way slavery was discussed reflected both colonial perspectives and African elite viewpoints. Newspapers framed slavery through several dominant narratives. The moral civilization narrative portrayed abolition as evidence of European moral superiority. The African elite reform perspective used newspapers to critique lingering forms of domestic slavery. Writers argued for modernization through dismantling traditional servitude. The economic transformation narrative highlighted the transition to legitimate trade, particularly in palm oil, cocoa, rubber, and gold. By the late 19th century, the cocoa boom, led by pioneers like Tete Kwashi, became symbolic of post-slavery economic transformation. The political resistance framing challenged colonial narratives, arguing that taxation and forced labor resembled new forms of exploitation. The role of newspapers in framing slavery and abolition had lasting consequences, helping construct national memory by emphasizing moral redemption. Today, sites like Cape Coast Castle and Elmina Castle stand as both historical monuments and educational centers, emphasizing resilience and historical accountability. The story of slavery and abolition in the Gold Coast shows the role of newspapers as instruments of power, shaping memory that persists today. The struggle for self-governance, Ghana's most important idea from the Gold Coast era to today. If there is one idea that has mattered more to Ghana than any other from the Gold Coast era to the present, it is the struggle for self-governance and accountable leadership. From colonial domination to modern democracy, Ghana's history has been shaped by a single powerful question: who governs us and in whose interest? This question has defined our politics, inspired resistance, fueled nationalism, justified coups, and continues to influence public debate today. British colonial rule formally began in 1821, and by 1874 the Gold Coast was declared a crown colony. Governance during this period was imposed from above, with little regard for indigenous political systems or popular participation. Resistance emerged through traditional authorities, merchants, and educated elites who opposed unfair taxation, land expropriation, and exclusion from decision-making. The formation of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society in 1897 marked a turning point as it successfully challenged colonial land policies that threatened communal ownership. Newspapers such as the Gold Coast Aborigines and later the Accra Herald became platforms for political debate, showing that demands for self-rule long predated independence. After World War II, calls for self-governance intensified. The 1948 Accra riots, sparked by the shooting of ex-servicemen protesting economic hardship, exposed deep failures in colonial administration. The United Gold Coast Convention, formed in 1947, and the Convention People's Party, established in 1949 under Kwame Nkrumah, transformed elite protests into mass political action. Their demand was clear and revolutionary: self-government now. This struggle culminated on 6th of March 1957, when Ghana became the first sub-Saharan African nation to achieve independence. Independence brought freedom, but it also introduced a new challenge: how to govern ourselves responsibly. While Nkrumah pursued rapid modernization, growing centralization of power and laws such as the Preventive Detention Act raised concerns about accountability and political freedom. These tensions remain among the most debated aspects of Ghana's early post-independence history. In 1966, Ghana's first military coup overthrew Nkrumah, claiming to restore accountability, though through undemocratic means. Between 1966 and 1992, Ghana experienced cycles of civilian and military rule. Each regime promised better governance, discipline, and economic stability. Yet repeated coups revealed a painful lesson. Removing leaders without building strong institutions does not guarantee good governance. This era showed that self-governance is not only about who holds power, but about systems that limit power. The return to constitutional rule in 1992 marked Ghana's most sustained effort at accountable self-governance. Regular elections, a free press, and peaceful transfers of power have earned Ghana international respect. Still, the core questions remain: corruption, institutional independence, media responsibility, and whether democracy is delivering economic justice. This shows that the struggle for self-governance did not end in 1957. It evolved. Self-governance remains Ghana's most important national idea because it defines our dignity, our responsibility, and our future. History teaches us that freedom without accountability is fragile, and development without participation is unsustainable. Ghana's progress depends not only on elections, but on an informed and engaged citizenry willing to question power, just as our ancestors did during the Gold Coast era. From 1821 to the Fourth Republic in 1992, these milestones define our journey. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, click the bell icon to receive notifications for all our latest updates, and follow and like GH Newspapers on all our social media platforms. The growth of newspaper readership in the Gold Coast, modern-day Ghana, cannot be understood without examining the critical role played by 19th century mission schools. These educational institutions, established by European Christian missions, were not only centers of religious instruction, but also engines of literacy, intellectual transformation, and political awareness. By producing a new class of literate Africans, mission schools created the very audience that would later sustain the rise of newspapers and public discourse in colonial West Africa. Origins of missionary education in the Gold Coast. Formal Western-style education in the Gold Coast began in the 18th century with European trading companies, but it expanded significantly in the 19th century through missionary efforts. Protestant missions such as the Basel Mission, the Wesleyan Methodist Mission, and the Roman Catholic missions established schools across coastal and inland communities. One of the earliest and most influential institutions was founded at Cape Coast by the Wesleyan Methodist Missionary Society in the 1830s. These schools focused on teaching reading, writing, arithmetic, and Christian doctrine. Instruction was typically conducted in English, though missionaries also translated religious texts into local languages like Twi, Ga, and Yu. The primary objective of mission education was religious conversion. However, the unintended consequence was the creation of a literate African elite, capable of engaging with written materials beyond the Bible, including newspapers, pamphlets, and political tracts. Literacy as the foundation of newspaper culture. Before the spread of mission schools, literacy rates in the Gold Coast were extremely low, and communication relied primarily on oral traditions. Newspapers, introduced in the late 19th century, required a readership capable of reading and interpreting complex texts. Mission schools fulfilled this need by producing a new social class: clerks, teachers, catechists, and merchants who were proficient in English literacy. These individuals became the primary consumers of early newspapers such as the Gold Coast Times, established in 1874, and later publications like the Gold Coast Chronicle. This emerging literate class also formed the backbone of the colonial bureaucracy, as many graduates were employed in administrative roles. Their daily interaction with written communication reinforced habits of reading, which naturally extended to newspapers. Mission schools and the rise of African intellectualism. Beyond basic literacy, mission schools cultivated intellectual curiosity and critical thinking. Students were exposed to European political philosophy, Christian moral teachings, and global history. This exposure shaped their worldview and stimulated engagement with contemporary issues such as colonial governance, trade policies, and social reforms. As a result, many early African newspaper editors and contributors were mission educated. Figures like J.E. Casely Hayford exemplify this trend. Educated in mission institutions, Hayford became a lawyer, journalist, and nationalist leader who used the press to advocate for African self-governance. Mission schools thus functioned as incubators for a new African intelligentsia that would dominate newspaper readership and production. Newspapers as extensions of missionary influence. In many cases, early newspapers were directly linked to missionary activities. Mission presses printed religious newsletters, educational materials, and later secular publications. These publications often promoted Christian values, moral reform, and social modernization. Mission-educated readers tended to trust printed materials because they associated them with authority and enlightenment. This trust significantly boosted newspaper circulation. However, missionary influence also shaped editorial perspectives. Early newspapers frequently reflected Christian moral frameworks, advocating temperance, education, and civilized social behavior, while sometimes criticizing traditional cultural practices. Geographic expansion of readership. Mission schools were initially concentrated along the coastal towns such as Cape Coast, Elmina, and Accra. Consequently, early newspaper readership was largely urban and coastal. As missions expanded inland during the late 19th century, literacy spread into interior regions. This expansion gradually broadened the geographical reach of newspapers, transforming them from elite coastal publications into more widely read platforms. By the early 20th century, mission-educated teachers in rural areas often served as local opinion leaders, reading newspapers aloud to communities and interpreting their contents for non-literate audiences. Political awakening and nationalism. Perhaps the most profound impact of mission schools on newspaper readership was their role in fostering political consciousness. Literacy enabled Africans to access information about global events, colonial policies, and nationalist movements. Newspapers became vehicles for political debate, enabling educated Africans to critique colonial rule, advocate reforms, and mobilize public opinion. Many nationalist leaders, including Kwame Nkrumah, emerged from mission school backgrounds and used newspapers as tools for political activism. Thus, mission schools indirectly contributed to the rise of nationalism by creating a literate public capable of engaging with political journalism. Long-term cultural and social impact. The influence of mission schools extended beyond the colonial era. They established a lasting culture of reading and intellectual engagement that continues to shape Ghana's media landscape today. Modern newspaper readership patterns still reflect the educational foundations laid by missionary institutions. High literacy rates, strong print traditions, and vibrant public discourse can all be traced back to the educational transformations initiated in the 19th century. Conclusion. Mission schools played a foundational role in the development of newspaper readership in the Gold Coast. By promoting literacy, nurturing intellectual elites, and fostering critical engagement with written texts, they created the social conditions necessary for a thriving press culture. Although originally designed to advance religious objectives, mission schools ultimately became catalysts for broader social change, enabling the rise of journalism, political awareness, and national identity formation in Ghana. Thank you for watching Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Once again, I am Sandra. Do not forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, click the bell icon for notifications, and follow and like GH Newspapers across all our social media platforms. Thank you for staying with us. We'll be back with more news at GMT 7 p.m. Until then, stay informed and stay safe.
This is Ghana Newspapers Newsroom. Live coverage. Real-time updates. Preserving Ghana's story. Empowering its digital future.